Hello and welcome back to the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. Taking a look at the standings below the camera, you'll notice Johann Minkwitz was removed from the list and a few of the scores have been updated. This is because starting in round number 3, Minkwitz would not show up for his future matches, and by round 6 he would have been officially removed from the tournament. So as part of my goal to set a certain narrative for this tournament, I've removed him from the list now because at this point he has effectively withdrawn. I've updated the scores, and that's why you can see, for example, Kurt von Bartleben has only one game to his name. This tournament was an absolute mess, and I'm going to continue driving that home throughout the rest of this chapter. Returning to the chess, in this round, Emanuel faced none other than the current leader of the tournament and also his older brother, Berthold Lasker. Now, Berthold doesn't have very many impressive results to his name. As I mentioned in the previous video, he tied for first in a tournament in Berlin in 1883, and he was on the organizing committee for the German Chess Master Association, so he was certainly recognized as a very strong player, but more of his credentials come from his general reputation than his material results. He didn't play very often as he focused on his medical career, but when he did play and when he took the game seriously, he was clearly quite a force to be reckoned with, as his 3 out of 3 score would indicate. His primary role in the annals of chess history was as a supporting role in Emanuel Lasker's career. Berthold supported him, let him live with him during his stay in Berlin, nursed him to health when he was young and also when he was slightly older and experiencing some health scares. We have many things to thank Berthold for, both in his direct care of Emanuel Lasker and for the very entertaining game we're about to take a look at today. Let's get to business. Berthold opened with d4, and Emanuel responded d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, fairly standard Queen's Gambit decline stuff, and now Emanuel played c6. This was about the point in chess history where these semi-Slav systems were getting perhaps not a super serious theoretical workout, but were at least considered somewhat viable. Berthold played e3, and Emanuel's knight b to d7 is technically a theoretical novelty for the time, but really only because of move orders, as people generally started with bishop to d6. For example, if bishop to d3, bishop to d6, we would have transposed to a game played between Wilhelm Steinitz and Mikhail Chigorin from their 1889 World Championship match. Here Steinitz broke open the center with e4, and after de4, knight e4, knight e4, bishop e4, Steinitz would go on to win this game as white. Instead of that, Berthold played bishop to d2. Now, this was sort of in the spirit of the times that you generally didn't want to lose any tempi if you didn't have to, and this ensures that white doesn't lose a tempo with this bishop if black were to take on c4. Now, after Emanuel played bishop to d6, bishop to d3 would transpose to a different game between Steinitz and Chigorin, although one that technically hadn't been played yet at this time. At the St. Petersburg tournament of 1895/96, the players castled, and after rook to e8, once again Steinitz broke in the center with e4. This time Chigorin took on c4. D captures c4, bishop captures on c4. Chigorin would go on to win this game as black, though it should be mentioned that it was due to a tactical mistake later on in the middle game by Steinitz, and not because this bishop lost a tempo in the opening. Berthold continued delaying things by playing rook to c1, and after Emanuel castled, as far as other database games are concerned, white has continued delaying the development of this bishop with queen to c2, or I once again have to mention the move bishop to d3 as having come up, but Berthold's move of bishop to e2 is a novelty, so it is as of move 8 that the players are playing a unique game. Here Emanuel jumped into the center with knight to e4, and now it was the German chess newspaper that was recommending that here Berthold castles, and they're completely correct. This is probably the last point where he can do so safely. He instead played knight captures on e4, and this is actually a terribly poor move. The point being, after d captures on e4, there's only 2 squares for this knight to realistically go to. Now, white could dream about sacrificing a pawn with knight to e5. The point is that after knight e5, d e5, bishop to e5, this is actually not super unplayable for white. You can imagine playing queen to c2, getting counterplay against the e-pawn, and probably white will get material parity at some point. However, they have to contend with the fact that black has this beautiful in-between move queen to g5, adding pressure to the g-pawn and another attacker on the knight. White can defend this through castles, and after knight e5, d e5, queen captures on e5 instead, coming with a double attack on the h-pawn. White has to defend this with g3, and now queen captures on b2. For the moment, black is up 2 pawns. They're probably going to lose the e-pawn at some point and will only be up 1 pawn, but still, they've shattered white's pawn structure on the queen side, they've introduced a whole bunch of light squared weaknesses on the king side, and overall, black is super happy here. So seeing as the complications following knight to e5 don't really favor him, Berthold tried to retreat back with knight to g1, but now that the white king is stuck in the center for pretty much the rest of the game, Emanuel decided that now was the time to attack in the center, and he decided so correctly, and he thrust forward with e5. After bishop to c3 and queen to e7, attacking and defending the e5 pawn respectively, we should take just a quick second to recognize how poor Berthold's position is. If, for example, queen to c2, which is a move we've talked about before, trying to look for counterplay against the e4 pawn, then black can introduce a defense to it by trading on d4, e captures d4, bishop captures d4, and now knight to c5, overprotecting the e4 pawn, and in addition preventing white from basically ever castling. Because if, for example, knight to h3, which is potentially one way for white to redeploy this knight, then black simply takes it. Bishop captures h3, g captures h3, and now they're going to continue attacking with f5. This e3 pawn is going to be coming under fire pretty quickly, and even if white castles are going to be right on the open g-file, this is an absolutely miserable position. So Berthold instead tries d5, which reads to me like an attempt to keep the center closed, but the problem is that Emanuel doesn't have to attack the center by taking on d4. He can again go after the e3 pawn, and he does so right away by thrusting forward with f5. Berthold traded on c6, d captures c6, b captures c6, and after rook to c2, Emanuel started the pressure right away with bishop to c5, getting an attacker ready to hit e3. And now Berthold played a very slow move, bishop to f1. The only explanation I can think of this is that Berthold wanted to get his knight to e2, but he's of course far too slow for this, as Emanuel continued his attack with great haste with f4. Berthold traded here as well, e captures f4, and now got his queen into the defense with queen to h5. This puts a little bit of pressure on the bishop, but even though it's defended, it moved out of the way with bishop to b4. Knight to e2 ensured the bishop was nice and defended, but after knight to e5, Berthold took on b4 anyways, and after bishop captures b4, knight to d3 check. And believe it or not, it was here on move 19 that Berthold Lasker resigned the game, because after king to d1 and queen captures on b4, checkmate is threatened right away on e1, and even if white prevents it with something like knight to c3, black is just going to start taking all the material. Knight captures b2 with check. If the king moves to either d2 or e1, then the knight gets pinned. If you play king to c1, then knight goes back to d3, they're going to take the f2 pawn, or if white takes on d3, bishop captures d3, e captures d3 actually wins the rook. If the rook moves out of the way, then the knight falls with check, it's going to lead to checkmate, and regardless, white's position is just completely busted, so it makes complete sense that Berthold decided to resign here. So yeah, perhaps not the most dramatic game we'll cover in this entire series. There were a few theories put forward as to why Berthold was never a particularly strong tournament player. One was that he struggled to hold his nerves over the course of a long tournament. I'm not entirely sure how well that applies to this game in particular, though I do think that it makes sense that he just completely underestimated just how bad this trade on e4 would be. After d captures e4, maybe he would have had a chance to do something dynamic if he'd have sacrificed a pawn with knight to e5. His position still would have been bad, but after knight to g1, his position was both bad and passive. And to what extent he either couldn't handle his nerves or underestimated the position or underestimated his little brother, I don't know. That's for the speculators to decide. All we know is that this was just a complete stomp, and this more or less makes up for Emanuel's own stomp right at the beginning of this tournament. So there we go. Emanuel's first win in the Berlin 1890 tournament unfortunately comes at the expense of his brother, who now loses his perfect status, but still is at the top of the tournament standings for now. More of this tournament will be coming very shortly, and I promise you I won't be taking such a long break in between videos next time. We'll be covering this more in just a little bit, so I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.